Yes.
AKA James Chalmers. Tell us who is Mr. X Stitch and where did he come from?
He was born, well, he was raised by wolves, by the Wolverhampton Wanderers football team. I don't know, just a guy from Milton Keynes, I suppose. My sins. Been stitching about 10 years. Started it for a joke. Should we do some pictures?
Yeah, let's get you going number one. So let's have a little look at that.
It's the Baylor Tapestry, which I finished in 1860. It's weird, I can't remember when it was, like 3 or 4 years into stitching something, and I remember when I was at school, like middle school, I did, we had a project about the Baylor Tapestry, and I stitched a man on a horse. And I'd forgotten that I did it. And then when I remembered I did it, I remembered how much I enjoyed doing it at the time. And I must have been, what, maybe 11 when that happened or something, and I didn't start stitching again until like 15, 16 years later that I started stitching again. And so it was interesting to remember that I did that and to actually remember that I really enjoyed it at the time. And I remember being really enthusiastic about stitching this man on a horse.
Can you remember the kind of time when you picked up that stitch again for the first time and what that motivation was?
Yeah. So the story goes, I was going on holiday to Canada with my wife, and I wanted something to do on the plane, and this was back in the good old days when you could do things on planes. And we went into a haberdashery shop, and I don't really know why, but we went in, and I found a piece which was this one, which is an Art Nouveau head by Alphonse Mucha. I didn't do this one, the one I did, I got the colours all wrong, and now, yeah, it took me 2 years to finish it. And now it lives on my mum's wall, and I just look at it and go, it's horrible. But the thing was, the reason that I bought that was because I thought it'd be funny. I was like, imagine the size of me doing a tiny little cross stitch. I thought that would be quite amusing, and that was my motivation. Pretty shallow. Yeah, I just got to freak people out on the plane. Post 9/11 world, that's a bit of a dark mood. But I did it, and when I got to Canada and I kind of sorted all the colours out and I started doing it, I found that actually it was a really pleasant thing to do. Because as we was discussed earlier, you know, the cross stitch is very meditative and it slows you down and it makes you stop and do this process, which is repetitive. I always get them words wrong. Repetitive. But at the same time, it's creative, you know, and you're making something as you go. And I think there's a real power in that, and you don't really realise until you do it how much it kind of soothes your soul and stuff. So when you're stitching, particularly cross stitch, because it's, you know, so like repetitive, it's just, I don't know, it's a really nice place that you find yourself in doing it. And
this sounds like an odd question, but what is cross stitch?
All right, so cross stitch is embroidery, but not all embroidery is cross stitch. Cross stitch is just 2 stitches basically. You get your basic needlepoint tent stitch, which is just kind of a diagonal. Cross stitch is on AIDA, so it has the corners, it has holes that you can work through rather than stitching on fabric. But a cross is simply 2 stitches, a top stitch and a bottom stitch. And I always say it's like a forward slash and a back slash. There's only one rule, which is always maybe your forward slashes go one way and your back slashes go the other way, and you don't fudge it up because... yeah, and it's just a kind of embroidery, and I describe it as a gateway craft because it's simple for people to do, but then it moves them on to harder crafts later.
And kind of, I mean, it's like going off a tangent, but people kind of talked about the relationship between computer screens and pixelation and cross stitch. Do you think that is something?
Totally. There's a website called Sprite Stitch, which is a good example of that. There's so much crossover between the kind of pixelated form that cross stitch is and your old school video games and all those sorts of things. I take great solace in it because I can't draw photography, I've got no artistic talent, but when it comes to little squares and stuff like that, it breaks it down to components that I think I can work with. So I tend to find that, yeah, I can be, there's a lot of security in those little squares. Some people don't take cross stitch seriously, and I'll look at them later because there's a lot of power in those. It's good stuff.
Talk about this.
Yeah, so that's pretty much the antithesis of where I'm at, really. I've got some kittens just recently, by the way. Rather love that, ninja cats. See, this is, so I do Alphonse Mucha, and then the next piece I bought was the Kiss by Klimt, 70,000 stitches. Nobody at this point has ever told me about small cross stitches you can do in an hour, so that is still unfinished. It's like 7 years later and I haven't done it yet. But this kind of thing, now, let me just say that cross-stitch and patterns and kits is perfectly valid. For a lot of people, the process of making cross-stitch and following a pattern is the thing that works for them, and that's great. But when I was looking for something that I wanted to do that reflected me, all I'm sort of finding is this kind of thing. And that really was what led me down the path of seeking out a piece of computer software that made cross-stitch patterns and then creating some graffiti cross-stitch and kind of going from there. Because for a myriad of reasons, and there's a lot of words being written on the subject, you know, cross-stitch is perceived as something that old ladies do, paraphrasing hugely. And it's just like, I'm not an old lady, I'm not interested in country cottages and hang on in there, and, well, unless it's hang on in there. And so it's more about trying to find new ways of doing it, and I think that's all I've done is perhaps nothing particularly revolutionary, but I just stitch things that I want to stitch, and people like them, they like them, and if it upsets them, well, we're in the 21st century.
And is, going back to Mr. X Stitch, is kind of Mr. X Stitch, you know, is Mr. X Stitch your Twiggy?
A little bit, yeah. I think that's probably quite true, actually. It must be annoying to people who know me. It is a bit of a safeguard, I suppose, and it's quite, I don't know, I always like Mr. X Stitch because it's a little bit edgy and I'm a bit of a comic book fan and stuff like that, and so it is, there's a bit of a nom de guerre there. There's me, Jamie Chalmers, man who enjoys embroidery and is a bit of a dork. And then there's Mr. X Stitch, who for some reason people think it's quite alright, really. Yeah. It's like stitching on the train. It's like one of the best ways, if you ever got a problem with stitching on the train, what you need to do is have a bald head and a beard. And then people ignore you, or like, if you know, I just get my stitching out and people don't know where to look. That does kind of help.
Do people strike up conversations sometimes with you?
If I'm not frowning. Yeah, my worst habit is I have my eyebrows doesn't really engender people's yeah. Do you know that this is bad, right? So if I want to look tough on the train and I've got my needle and I'm changing my foot, what I do is I put it in the leg of my jeans because the fabric's quite tight, so you can do that anyway. But I always go. So I just that's quality, that is. Yeah, so I'm a bit less hanging in there, and I'm a bit more.
So excellent.
Alright, so there's a whole subversive cross-stitch movement, and you know, from what I've realised, that you know, cross-stitch and quilting and embroidery has been used years for political and subversive reasons, and I think it's only recently that the internet has enabled people to come out of the shadows or come out of different parts of the world and commune with one another. And I mean, my website, I was fortunate to start that at a time where we've been able to then showcase work with other people and stuff like that. So there's lots of, you know, proper kind of sweary cross-stitch. The book Subversive Cross-Stitch came out in 1996, and that was when you get a flowery pattern with an F-bomb in the middle of it and those sorts of things. And that serves a purpose for a lot of people because, you know, if you want to do something really, really rude with cross-stitch, but it means you have a go at cross-stitch, then that's a winner because it overcomes that barrier. And that's pretty much what my whole thing is about, just removing those barriers, because stitching is a joyful experience, and I wish people would do it. For me, I'm a bit less kind of sweary, and I'm a bit more kind of, I prefer a bit of wit. One of the favourite pieces is done by a friend of mine called B. Frank, and it's like a lovely kind of antique border, and there's a couple running across the top, and it just says, "You have the pleasant air of a dog in heat." And it's witty, you know, it's kind of snarky. We like those sorts of things where you'll like read something and not be sure. And so a piece like that it kind of like sums up my philosophy because it looks classic, it's a little bit rude, but we're all kind of grown-ups and there's nothing wrong with that.